All right. This is today's keynote interview that has a lot to do with the whole concept, the very sexy concept of metadata, and giving credit where credit is due, and getting paid for your online content. And here today we have Ty Roberts from Gracenote, the founder and still CTO of Gracenote, Jim Griffin from OneHouse, and the faux list, of course, the never-ending faux list. Oh my God, I've never gotten so many emails. I need a filter for the faux list. And Matt Ostrower from Pandora, who is going to moderate today's discussion. So all of these folks have deep, deep history in digital music distribution and digital media. So this is really, really key for folks who want to know how to make sure that they're able to adequately monetize those media files that they are letting proliferate around the internet. So Matt, please take it away.
Hi, everybody. Really happy to be here today. Thought we'd start by a little bit of introductions. You guys want to talk a little bit about your companies, your history, how you got here?
Okay, so I'm Ty Roberts. I'm a serial entrepreneur, which means I've had, 3 businesses go bankrupt before the one that succeeded. So one thing I wanted to say to all the entrepreneurs out there, which is you got to keep going. But you should keep going in some direction. I would just say that, which is, pick a vision of what you really want to do and then go do it. My company, Gracenote, actually started out at the end of the CD-ROM era, which is in the late 90s. We were making what I call visually rich, enhanced albums. And I worked with David Bowie, and I worked with Todd Rundgren, and I was making kind of like visual, graphical, animated, incredible, what the future of albums should have been. But unfortunately, this thing, the internet, came along and obliterated CD-ROMs. And the problem with that was that at that time, the CD-ROM had like a lot of graphics that were able to fit on there, 150 kilobytes a second coming off the disk. It took literally till now to get that. Now you can stream video. But the reality is that on the internet, it went into text. That's what happened, because in those days, it was like dial-up modem, like that I've Got Mail. That was about the era of that. And so Gracenote started because I couldn't put graphics anymore out for the music. Instead, I started to have just the information for the music. And the database itself was built by the fans. If you put a CD into the computer, it would look up on our database and see if it knew what the names of the songs were on the CD, but if it didn't know what it was, it would ask you to put it in. And you'd put it in for you, so that your songs would have names and the basic information, and then it went into the database for everybody else. And it started out very simple like that, and that database grew to have not only the music albums in there, but then pretty soon it had audio fingerprints for all the digital files, links to all the cover art, and before you know it, that database was being used by almost every major music application, including iTunes. And now that database is really large. It runs scan and match for Apple and Coverflow and a whole bunch of other, Amazon stores and all kinds of stuff, and we have lyrics and everything else. The size now is about 500 million people use it. It's the largest database of music information in the world, 130 million recordings, 50,000 new recordings a day, 18 billion searches a month, 38,000 servers or something.
How many new recordings a day was that?
50,000.
It's amazing.
But that's like every crazy thing from like my son to, and some of them aren't even music, as you know. People are recording, this event. So, but all that goes in there, and that information now is, I think we have a very complete information database for music, but I think what we're going to talk about in the panel a little bit today is that's still not enough necessarily to get you everything you need. So now I'm going to turn it over to Jim, and he can talk about maybe a little bit about his background and what he's been working on for 20 years.
Yeah, well, I'll try to keep it brief. OneHouse is the vehicle I use for my focus on the digital delivery of art and its monetization. Principally, I do a lot of work for big companies. I worked at Griffin for a number of years, almost a decade. I worked with Cherry Lane and Milt Oaken for a similar period of time, and I went to Warner to work on blanket licensing, principally for schools. But in between these ventures and during these ventures, I stay focused on the digital delivery of art and its monetization through OneHouse. And at OneHouse, we publish the fall list every day. If you're interested, it's a great deal of mail and a lot of brunches focused on these issues. I've been doing a lot of work of late, principally since I left Warner, on registries, because it's become clear to me that we do not know who owns or who performs or who really is responsible for this large number of musical tracks, but books, paintings, photographs, etc. We call it intellectual property, but we don't treat it as intellectual property. Typically, we register our property, our cars, our houses, etc., and then we complain when somebody steals them, but we don't even have the forthrightness to go down to the Copyright Office and keep current who owns these things, let alone who helped make them. So I've evolved a bit of passion for this and discovered that the United Nations is also concerned about this problem around the world. And so I've been doing a great deal of work for them as well. But it's become clear to me that government and private industry have to work together to make this work. It's a bit of a lighthouse in the sense that lighthouses are loaded with externalities and they typically don't get done unless government gets involved. But it never gets done well unless a company like Gracenote is involved, unless there's a profit motive. So I've said enough, and I think questions.
So you went from working in the music industry to working for the government. Which one's more challenging?
You know, I never feel like I work for the government. I feel like the United Nations, it hardly feels like the government, but at the same time, it gives you the ability to go into countries that are critical for this. Like, we typically think as Westerners, but we don't think as much about how important it is to go to China or to Russia or to South Africa or to Brazil. It's just absolutely essential we see this as a global issue that has to be enumerated in many languages and many character sets. So
Certainly.
That's why I think about the United Nations.
Natural
and
transition. So I work for Pandora. I work in our New York office. I'm the director of artist programming. And I work with artists, management, labels, all the rights holders of music to kind of create promotional opportunities for them on Pandora. We produce a lot of concerts. We do a lot of events. Certainly the data is something that we talk about a lot. You know, how do you get paid for your work, making sure you're registered with Sound Exchange, which is how we pay our artists. How many artists are here, just so I can get an idea of who we're talking to? Great. How many people listen to Pandora or use Pandora? Anybody? Okay. We're getting there.
It's like 100%.
Pretty good. We just passed about 200 million registered users last month, so getting quite some traction here. So, you know, metadata, certainly something that we think about. It's how we attach, categorize, listen to music. I think as music fans, it's inherent to us. It's how you decide you want to go to the gospel tent or, the blues stage, right? It's really inherent in how we do things. So it's very important to, talk about that. And as the revolution, digital revolution's moving forward, it's all about tracking download, tracking plays, and getting paid for that work.
You might want to, for metadata. Metadata is the textual information and the numeric information that's sitting in that little ID3 tag, but the problem is the ID3 tag doesn't have all the fields for all the stuff you really need. Mm-hmm. So that information is critical because there's two components to the data. The first is how your music is characterized and your information about your name and who's in the thing. And then the second is the information that would tell it what publisher or what place money would actually be sent should someone actually try to listen to this or play it. And getting the data for the payment and the data for the, I'll call it the experience, which is getting your music selected, is both really important.
Sure. So if you're an artist here and you're getting some traction with distribution, what are some simple best practices you should should be part of you're updating Twitter, you're updating Facebook, you're taking care of your data. What are some common best practices?
First of all, it's unless you're usually you would probably go to what's called an aggregator, a music service. So my company's owned by Sony, so I'd say IOTA is the one I would recommend. But there's many of these guys who all have different services, and you put your music into their system, and what they do is they then get your payment information correct. They submit it to Sound Exchange, which is what you guys use, but they also put your music into the different music stores out there and then collect the money for you. That is critical.
Yeah, although the problem is it's a good idea, but it's not enough. Take TuneCore for example. Until recently, they didn't even do ISRC codes or UPC codes. They falsified them both, and
right.
they admit it. And so, this is a critical problem. There are three identifiers right now that are absolutely essential. They're the three legs of the stool. One of them is ISRC, that's the International Standard Recording Code. Then there's the ISWC, which applies to the lyrics and the composition, essentially the work. And then there's a new standard called ISNI, I-S-N-I, that goes to the names of the performers and the identification of those who played a role in its creation. And each of these are critical, each in their own way. And it's essential that you register with them and not assume that because you put it in the ID3 tag that it was somehow passed along.
It actually won't get passed along.
Yeah, and anything in the ID3 tag can be changed too.
That's
and
right.
so you're at risk for someone taking your file, substituting their information. And it's just essential that you get yourself in these databases.
Because essentially that code is like your bank account number. So like if you need money to get wired to your bank, having the wrong number doesn't work, and they don't like figure it out from the number. There's nothing in the number that actually says who it is. So you need to make sure that you have the right number and it's in your files. That's critically important, and then you're registered with a current address and a current music publisher, because otherwise they'll send a letter, they'll do something, and nobody will respond, and it goes into essentially a black box.
Yeah, and by the way, that's a great word to pick up on, black box. You need to understand why you're not paid. And you need to understand why the big companies don't register. And that's that they don't have to register to get paid. They get money out of what's called the black box. Every quarter, there is what we call unattributed income, money that comes in without proper records. And that's most of what comes in. And you should know that that money is divided by the direct members of the society according to their market share, not their registrations. And let me be clear, even a sub-publishing arrangement doesn't entitle you to a piece of the black box. So essentially, the major players in the business take the unattributed income every quarter, divide it amongst themselves according to market share, and that's your money. That's the money you didn't register. That's the money that came in unattributed. And to give you an example, Sound Exchange told me recently, and they're one of my clients, that less than 5% of all money comes in with an ISRC code attached. So that means that there's a 95% chance that your money is going somewhere else other than your pocket. That's how important what Ty is telling you.
Right. The other thing is that getting your textual or basic information correct. So in our database, Gracenote, you can look yourself up, you can see what's in there. Making sure it's correct is actually really important, because even small spelling mistakes are an issue. And by the way, a lot of people make an urban music and they use the words featuring in parentheses, but they don't do it consistently across the services. Those also won't match up. So if it's featuring period so-and-so parenthesis, and then it's in another service and it's F period so-and-so parenthesis, the computer sees that as two different things. So it's really critical to get your information in, get it incorrect, get it in once, and get it everywhere, and register with these different services.
And it would be wrong for us to leave you with the impression that this is all about money. Money's important, but as my friend Daryl Friedman at NARA says, it's about cash and credit, meaning it's about attribution. You have a moral right, we consider it a moral right in many countries, to receive proper attribution for your creative endeavors. So even if this isn't about money for you, it's about credit, and even more than that, let's say you don't care that you were the background singer, even though background singers get 2.5% of the Section 114 money. Let's say you don't care that you were a studio musician. And again, studio musicians have at least 2.5% of the Sound Exchange money set aside for them. Let's say you don't care about that. But the audience cares. They want to find work where, say, you were the bass player or you were one of the singers. And so the history of this culture, of this art, needs to be enumerated. There's no place that needs to be said more strongly than in New Orleans, where the culture, the history of this place is intertwined with its music. And we are allowing every week, every day, every month, an enormous amount of that history and that culture to disappear as we fail to register, as we fail to enumerate who wrote that song, who was the engineer, who was the producer, who played bass, was Aretha Franklin really a background singer on that track? All lost to history, unfortunately. Let's not let it continue.
Yeah, we were talking about that earlier, before the panel about, so you're creating your online identity, you're creating your your band name, your song names, and I think one of the common challenges with data is it's listed incorrectly, right? On Pandora it happens if you're a new band and you decide to call your band the Radiohead, it's going to be challenging because there's already a Radiohead, but you have symbols in your band name. We were talking about this earlier. I mean, what are some of the common pitfalls that you think artists are making, or things that they can do better? We can
Here's
keep it
just
positive.
like putting dollar signs in your name. I mean, that's a cool thing. I know that's cool. But most people don't realize they're dollar signs, especially if you do it really creatively.
Does
when
it
people
work?
search for you in Google, they're not going to put the dollar sign in. So if it doesn't, Google may by now have figured out that dollar sign equals S, okay? But whatever, I'm not sure if it has. So just stuff like that. You want to think about the fact that the world of the future is about search, about being found, about being discovered. Somebody just hears your name or sees you for 10 minutes on stage or sees something, make it easy to get to you. And then the second thing is getting your influencers, like if you build I'll just give you an example. If you build a Wikipedia page, what you guys probably don't realize is that a lot of music services scan Wikipedia for information about the music artists and use that to derive playlists and to pick what music they're going to play. So you may be an unknown guy, but in your Wikipedia page, you say, my band is like The Who, or influenced by so-and-so, or I'm this kind of a guy. Some services, which will remain nameless, will pick that information up and use it to try to get a hint about when to play your tracks. So actually having a good Wikipedia page is a good idea. It doesn't get you the copyright registration that Jim was mentioning. It's more on and I was kind of saying this at the beginning, and this is really the area my company's focused on, which is I'm not focused on the money payment. Money doesn't go through me for music. I'm focused on getting your song picked and played. I'm focused on making it discoverable. And so the reality is that means you got to be categorized. You got to be properly categorized. I can go off just for 1 second on that. So Mariah Carey, you guys know that. When we first started working with at that time her label was Sony, she had a clause in her contract that said she was unclassifiable, okay? Because I think that was a cool idea. So in our system, they actually changed her genre to 0, okay? Which essentially is undefined, okay, in our system. Undefined gets picked 0. So her music literally, eventually someone called up and said, hey, this doesn't show up when I play this other gal that should be just like her. And we looked in there and we were like, why did you guys set this thing to 0? Like that's like we say.
Did they set anyone else to 0? Was Prince?
I don't think there's anybody else set to 0. I don't know. But anyway, we fixed that. So that's just an example and we, by the way, we have removed that classification. When we first started our company, my other co-founder, Steve Sheriff, and we only had like 9 genres of music. And 0 was miscellaneous. A very useless genre, not very good. So that should have been like soundtracks of trains or cars driving, but a lot of people just didn't know what kind of music they made, so they just picked 0 as well. Now we have 2,800 genres in every language of the world. It's very organized, and just like you guys do in Pandora, actually figuring out what kind of style of music people who like this kind of music would like to find you. That turns out to be really important.
Yeah, I want to add that the Copyright Office is another place, and I didn't mention it, but that's also a place where you would register lyrics in a composition or a sound recording or both. There's a quirky thing there, and that is that a number of years ago, the world voted to end what are called formalities in copyright. And what that means is that when you make a creative work, even doodling on a napkin at a restaurant, it's copyright the moment that you fix it in a medium, like a napkin, or on the audio tape, or say on your hard drive. The moment it's done, it's copyrighted. There's no question about it. You're entitled to full copyright protection at that moment. And the question of whether you register it really is your decision to make, and we're debating that. We're not sure that that's fit for the future decades and centuries to come. It's a different time than it was in the 1960s when we didn't require registration. So we're debating that heavily. But I will add as well that it's essential that you realize that not all the world speaks English and that your Wikipedia page doesn't help you in China or Russia or South America. And if the world of music is to recover from the hit that it's taken, the growth that we get back comes from these other countries. It comes from new people in, say, China or South America or Russia saying, hey, love that New Orleans music, want to learn more about it. And if you haven't done those things that get your music at least registered in a way that makes sense. And here what we're referring to is a code number that doesn't matter what language it's expressed in. And that's why we emphasize so much the importance of registering an ISRC, an ISWC, and an ISNI, because the result is a code number that can't be misinterpreted through different languages and different payment systems.
We should mention, Jim, that the reason it's becoming more and more important is, in fact, because of services like Pandora. Radio is, these kind of radio services, they're called radio, but they're streaming radio. These are the most popular music services today. In the past, yes, Apple iTunes is very popular. People would buy a single track on there. Well, of course, if your song is in iTunes, unless somebody mistakenly registered it for you, they have the place to pay for that song because they had to get it registered to get it onto iTunes. There's a tool they give everybody. But the reality is that the radio people can pick any song from any source, and then it's all about this code, which goes into their database every time every song is played by every user. That number is exported in whatever text they've got, and it gets sent to SoundExchange. And then they send a big check to SoundExchange, and they're supposed to pay it out. So the reality is, and they're just, I mean, you guys are the biggest service, but there are many, many services like that, and even streaming radio from radio stations and things like this. So that number is critical.
Yeah, I just want to add, though, how unfair it is that they pay for sound recordings, but radio does not. That typically radio, which is almost a $30 billion industry, pays nothing for the use of sound recordings. They pay only for the use of the lyrics and the composition in the United States. And there are very few other countries where this is true. And it not only is unfair for Pandora, but it means that money is collected for your works when they're used in other countries, but not forwarded back to the United States because we do not reciprocate. And because we do not reciprocate, they are exempted. They get to keep that money. And so it is essential, not only in the name of equity, that those who use music pay for the use of the sound recording, as does Pandora, but it's very essential that we be able to get the money that's being collected for us abroad and not delivered to us for lack of reciprocity. So that's a change that everyone in this room can get behind, unless you're, of course, working for a radio station. But I think even you, if you work at a radio station, know that this is fundamentally unfair and that we need a sustainable economy of ideas in order to perpetuate the good franchise that they've had for a long time. But hats off to Pandora for paying a lot of money for the use of music.
I think this is probably a whole separate panel that we could talk about for a while.
But we got to say it because it's part of why you need to register, is that this money is yours, you're entitled to it. It'll only come when you do register unless you're a major corporation that's a direct member of a society, as I mentioned earlier.
It's a really important point. So if you're an artist, register for SoundExchange, get your information in there, get paid. There's a lot of money that every year that we would like to pay out to artists, but we can't find them.
So just if you register with SoundExchange, that's not enough.
Right.
Because,
that's step one.
Because then you're a member of SoundExchange, but they've got to link up the
Correct.
use of that sound recording with you in order to get that money to your account. And by the way, there's no question that this is the best deal in the business for an artist. I say that because I challenge you to find a deal where you can split 50-50 with no recoup at all. There is no recoup on SoundExchange money. So you make a sound recording for a record label, you get 45% of that money to the featured artist, 2.5% to the background singers, 2.5% to the session musicians, no recoup at all. That is the best money in the music business, I think.
Yeah, it's a good point. So we got about 5 minutes left. I'd like to open it up for some Q&A. I'm sure there's some questions for these guys.
Ask us some questions.
Anything. Ask them anything.
Hi.
Hi.
I'm Sarah Gromko. I'm program director for Sweet Home New Orleans, and we actually teach a course on accessing current revenue streams. Our next class is actually about metadata, so this is so perfect. We have been going through the process of signing up for registering copyrights, getting signed up with the proper PROs and SoundExchange. And what I was planning on doing is actually having them use Gracenote to input the registration codes within the notes section. Is that advisable at all?
I would, you can see me afterward, but I probably would, yes, you want to put some stuff into our database, but ours is more about getting selected in the recommendation engines that generate the playlists and also for sales. Really, there's some other tools that would probably get you faster to what Jim's looking for and connecting the dot with Pandora. And I don't know what the submission process for tracks for Pandora is. You guys might talk about that.
Yeah, there's a separate, it's submitmusic.pandora.com is the way to do it.
So they have like a web page for that. So we can answer your question afterwards.
Okay.
And by the way, that's an awesome class to have, and everyone should go to that because this stuff is really weird and it
Yeah.
is complicated. And maybe we sound like Mr. Spock and Captain, up here, but the reality is that it's the world of the future is about data, and the data needs to be right.
If I were you, I would strongly consider making a registry purely for New Orleans. And I say that because it doesn't make the world a better place to have only one registry. It makes the world a better place to have lots and lots of registries. And no registry is going to record the wealth of information that New Orleans ought to have registered about this very unique art form. It is essential that you consider using your facilities to enumerate art directly. And building that registry is not that expensive, and I know you can make a deal with Gracenote to get the whole of it transferred back and forth and synchronized. But give them a local place. Even consider a storefront at which musicians could show up and ensure that the wide array of opportunities for registration for them are followed through, and that the history and the unique culture of New Orleans music and art is somehow recorded for the future in ways that are sustainable.
I 100% agree with you, and that's why we do what we do here.
So go for it, yes.
Great. Question there?
Elton Foster with Group Rodeo Management. How does this liaison with, older registry formats such as BMI and ASCAP, and does it in some ways antiquate BMI, ASCAP, things like that?
It's not a bad thing to have a private registry. Again, as I said with the previous question, there's no need to have only one in the world, and it doesn't make the world a better place to have only one. It's fine to have many, but let's remember that ASCAP and BMI are private registries run for the benefit of their members alone and purely for performance purposes. And so they are looking at it from a different perspective. And I will remind you, too, that our mortgage crisis partly had its roots in a private registry of property called MERS, M-E-R-S, the Mortgage Electronic Registration System, that failed miserably. And so I think it needs to be clear that private registries are fine. They are just that. And that it's essential that they true up to bigger registries and global registries that have both a public and a private component to them. And at the end of this process, we should have an ability to read any musical work or any piece of intellectual property from across the world. So I hope I've answered your question that they are fine in and of themselves. I will say that they are necessary but not sufficient conditions for success.
Great. We have time for 2 more questions. You guys want to combine your questions?
Yeah, Nate Williams here. I just had a quick question. I've worked with the band here. It's been around here for decades. And we recently filed with the Sound Exchange and have had experience that somebody's already recouped our funds there. And I'm wondering if you guys have had any experiences with that or can share any stories or insights about how that process works.
It's outrageous. It's a fraud. Seriously. I mean, someone fraudulently took your money, and it was a theft. And I do suggest that you find a good local attorney. I know Suzette Becker around here, and she's pretty tough, and I know there's others, and there's plenty of good lawyers down here who'd chase that cash for you, and I know Sound Exchange would be very sympathetic. Absolutely. They do have money that is unattributed, for example, and so I don't think it's a huge problem for them to make you whole once you've proven that it was a theft from you.
There's another one to really think about is claiming your YouTube live performance videos. So basically the way it works on YouTube, you have two deals. You can either leave it up and they collect the money and do whatever they want with it, which usually they keep it, or you can have it taken down. If you want to have them take the clip down, they can take the clip down, or you can actually just claim it. And you have to kind of give them a soundboard recording, essentially from the live thing, or a video copy of the performance, and then that money from those, the percentage of the money will do. It's not a fantastic deal, frankly, but the reality is that it's important to do as well, because those live video clips also generate money in the internet space.
Know this about YouTube. Google wants to clear the rights to the content on YouTube because they cannot wrap ads around that which they have not cleared. And they do not wrap ads around that which they have not cleared. And so when they have not cleared something, they lose money too. They're not taking it and keeping it. They're leaving money on the table, you're leaving money on the table. Failure to do what Ty just said deprives both Google and you of the cash that could otherwise be received. That's essential for you to know. There's money there, they can wrap ads around it, they're not collecting it until you do.
They will put up public service banners and things like that. They do something because they have space, but the reality is it's not helping you or your musicians.
Great point. Last question? Yeah.
How about literary works? What you guys are talking about, can that go into books?
Yes.
Yeah, we should, this is like a whole, we could have a panel on this, but you should know, first of all, yes, there are full registration for literary works, same kind of thing. And this is also an emerging major thing because of the number of ebooks and things like that are going on. It's the same thing, except you're getting your book through the iPad or whatever. And you can publish yourself now. You don't even need a publisher. So, but it is important to have the right numbers for books, which is what number is book?
Well, it's called ISBN,
Yeah.
and there's a company called Bowker, Bowwker, that manages that in the United States. Nielsen does it in the UK. There are a number of companies around the world. And that, by the way, is a good model, the way they do it with books. I think that the right answer is to create a market in registry services, to make it profitable to register. For Bowker, it is profitable to register you. Then they put it into the ISBN. I think that's the right model for music. I won't go too much more deeply into that because we have limited time, but it's just fair to say that when it's profitable for everyone, it gets done. And when it's not, it doesn't, and people take your money. So the failure to register only enriches other people in a bad way.
Great. So thanks so much for coming. Thanks, Ty and Jim,
All right, yeah,
for your
thank you.
time. We'll be around today and all weekend. Have a great weekend. Thanks.
Thank you, guys. Matt, thank you so much. Great job moderating. Ty Roberts, Jim Griffin, everyone, to the tops in the field. I'm sorry that we only had 40 minutes. That was
It's okay.
we could talk for 40 hours on all that stuff.